In this video, I'm going to cover the New York Times rent or buy calculator. So if you go to Google and you just search New York Times rent or buy, the first match is going to be, is it better to rent or buy New York Times? So if you click on that, you're going to come to this page. And so basically it tells you the choice between buying a home or renting is one of the biggest financial decisions that many adults make, which is true. And so this calculator is basically here to help you answer the question. Just in a nutshell, we're going to have a bunch of variables here on this side of the page that we're going to enter. And then over here, the final output is if you can rent a similar home or let's say condo or apartment or housing just in general for less than, and then this number is going to change based on these inputs, which we're going to see, then renting is better. Okay, so basically this is the break even rent. Okay, so if you can rent for this amount or less, you are better off renting. If you cannot, then you're better off buying. So now let's look at a couple of the variables. And before we do that, actually, this little comment here is really important. So it says how to read the charts. The charts that are relatively flat indicate factors that are not particularly important to outcome. Conversely, the factors that have steep slopes have a high impact. So let's look at this first one, house price. You can see here that it's extremely non-linear. This is the opposite of flat. So we can see that the home price is a very substantial factor in this particular calculation. Let's say we're looking at a house that's listed for $500,000. Okay, so I'm going to move this slide to 497, close enough. Okay, so, or actually, I guess we can enter it here. Okay, so we've entered we've entered the house that we're looking at. We're considering buying, and we're trying to decide, is the price worthwhile when I could rent a similar property and be just as happy. So I've moved it to 500,000. Let's continue going on down this list here. So let's say I'm only really committed to staying for 5 years. Okay, and you can see here, if I was staying for a really short amount of time, it's pretty steep, but the longer I stay, it's pretty flat. And so, the difference between 10 and 20 years is not really going to change this rent here because we can see kind of how this graph moves the amount. It's not going to change that much. From 20 to 30 years, it's probably even less. So it's a pretty flat curve the longer we go out. Okay, so let's just keep it pretty short. In the previous video I did about this decision, we said that 5 years is kind of the minimum. And you can see why, because on this side of the curve, it rises a lot. So if you're only going to stay for 1 year, the equivalent rent is going to be very high, meaning that it's going to be very costly to buy the house up front if you're only going to stay for a year. And then after 5 years, it flattens out dramatically. So that's why, visually you can see why 5 years is kind of the minimum. And this is kind of the cutoff point where it starts getting flat. Okay, so what are the mortgage details? So what is the mortgage rate? I'd say 3.67 is too low in the current environment. I saw a 30-year mortgage going for 4.25% just recently. So let's move it to that. And you can see the higher the interest, the higher the equivalent rent is going to be, because again, buying the house becomes more expensive as the interest rate gets higher. So the rent equivalent is going to also go up to compensate for that. Okay, so the down payment, you can see here it's pretty flat. So let's just keep it at 20%, which is kind of the standard down payment for buying a house. And then let's also keep the mortgage at 30 years. And again, this one's pretty flat too, so it's not really changing. It looks like it's slightly downward sloping, so it becomes a little less in the rent equivalent as we go closer, but not too much. Okay, and then what does the future hold? So now there's some categories here of these are all assumptions, okay? These are going to be things that we assume are going to happen. And so the first one is home price growth rate. So historically, prices have gone up in value a certain percentage every year on average. But it's speculative to say that that is going to continue, and it's also speculative to say at what percentage it's going to continue. So you can see here, if we assume less property appreciation, the equivalent rent is going to go up in a pretty steep manner. And that's because a lot of the benefit of owning a house is basically the house increasing in value. You're getting a return on your investment largely from the appreciation from the house. And so if you assume that it's not going to appreciate as much, the incentive to own the house drops. And you can see here from the steepness of this that it drops quite a bit as you change this percentage, and not even by that much. So if we go from 3%, for example, per year growth to 2%, it changed the equivalent rent by $400 a month, which is pretty substantial. Historically, it's been around 3%, which is, I think, why they kept the default around 3. But let's say, we've just come off a period of really high property value growth. And if your opinion is, hey, I don't see the property values growing at the same rate for the next 5 years at 3% a year, and it's actually been higher for the past 5 years. But let's say we're kind of pessimistic and we're going to keep it at 2% a year. It raises the equivalent rent a lot. So this opens the door and pushes us more towards being a renter as we have less home price growth. Okay, rent growth rate. And so you see here it's downward sloping because, again, if the rents are growing more quickly, then clearly it's going to be better to buy a house. But you can see it's much flatter than the home price appreciation. And that's because the home price growth, this is going to affect the return on your investment. And you're only putting 20% down. So a 2% growth in the house price is actually a really big percentage return on your down payment, the amount that you're investing. So that's why this is kind of nonlinear, because you're using a mortgage and a loan to buy the house. And so the return on your actual money is going to be really high if the house goes up in value. But rent, you're just paying the same amount every month. There's no leverage involved. So that's why it's flatter. Okay, this is an important one too. And you can see that it also is it will move the equation quite a bit. This is the amount that you expect to earn on your money. Because remember, when you're investing in the house, you could have used the down payment to put in the stock market or some other investment. So there's an opportunity cost. And so what that opportunity cost is this investment return rate. So if I, for example, had a small business and I could have taken the money that I would have put as the down payment in my house, let's say it was 100,000, and instead invested it in a business I was starting, and that business could have earned me, a 50% return on that $100,000 per year, then clearly I might be better off financially of just renting and then taking that same money I would have bought the house with and investing in my business. So that's why the investment return rate is a really sensitive kind of metric in this equation. So it's assuming 4%. I would say, maybe it's if you can get an average of 6% in the stock market just by buying an index fund, it obviously moves the rent up quite a bit. So again, if you move this higher, it pushes you towards being a renter because you could basically earn more on the down payment that you're making. But then, if we change something, let's see how these all kind of flow together, because if I change this to a smaller percentage, let's say I got a FHA loan, you can see here that it flattened this curve out a lot because now there's not so much money. The opportunity cost is much lower as opposed to, let's say we were going to put down 40%. So you see here, then it got really steep, right? So all these graphs are all moving together. Actually, they're all related. or many of them are related. So this kind of flattened it out again. So you know, that's why this calculator is cool because it has all the linkages. When you change one thing, it's gonna kind of change the other things that are dependent on it. Okay, and then inflation. So this is one that is gonna matter too. But you can see here it actually is not changing the equation too much. It's pretty flat, and however they've modeled it, the inflation is probably affecting both the rent and the buy equation. So it looks like it doesn't really matter because it's gonna affect the cost almost equally of both buying and renting. Okay, so let's just keep it at 5% because right now inflation is high. Okay, taxes. Property tax in California is only around 1.1% in most places. And this is cool too. It even asks you how you file your return. So if you're an individual versus a joint, that actually makes a difference. See, it's 2652 as a joint return. Oh, I guess it didn't. Okay, I bet there's some scenario where it does affect. Okay, not sure exactly how this. Oh, okay. So this has to do with this calculator is so involved that it's actually calculating the tax as if you would sell the property at some point. So I think maybe if we had this go up more, then let's see if this is going to change. Yeah, okay, not sure exactly how that factors in, but there's probably some set of settings where it's going to matter if you're filing as a married couple or an individual. Okay, so let's say we are a kind of mid-level earner. Our marginal tax rate is 30%. And then closing costs. So these are like the costs of getting your house ready for sale, the escrow costs, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's about right. 4%. We can call it that. That seems reasonable, around 4%. And then typically the cost of selling a home. Oh, sorry. The cost of buying a home. This is going to be like mortgage fee. You know, you're going to have some expenses of escrow and just kind of there are some costs associated with buying a house. So 4%, let's just leave it there. Cost of selling home is going to be at least 5% for the commission, and it looks like it kept it at 6% for all the other costs. So yeah, that's about right. Let's just kind of keep it there. And this seems about right because the cost of a mortgage is also pretty substantial. So let's just leave these at the default. Maintenance and fees. So the cost of maintenance of your house. So it looks like this is a first year thing. So it's only $5,000. Let's say we had kind of a fixer upper property and we got to put in $10,000. Okay, so you see here it's a $10,000 kind of renovation cost. The homeowner's insurance, 2,300 is about right. Monthly utilities, okay. Common fee. So if there's like a HOA, let's say there's some $30 landscaping HOA, common fee deduction. Let's see. Wow. Okay. So if some of it is deductible in your taxes, which may be possible, it's pretty flat though. Again, we can just look at the graph and see that this one is not really a substantial factor. Okay, additional renting costs. So 1 month security deposit, broker's fee. Let's say we just found it on Craigslist. There's no broker's fee, and then we pay $500 a year for insurance or $459 a year. Okay, fine. That seems reasonable. Okay, so once we've gone through all these steps here, it spits out a number that says if we can rent this $500,000 house with all these assumptions that we went through for 2,900 or less per month, then we are better off renting. And so this calculator, I think, is a great way to quantify the decision and have a very solid benchmark in this number here that will give you a good sense of, where you stand in the decision. So for you out there that are trying to make a decision as to renting or buying, I really encourage you to check this calculator out. There's a lot of detail that you can read on the different items that I, couldn't go into full detail in this video because it would just take too long. But if you want to really get into the nuances, you can read all the descriptions of stuff that are on this calculator. And but you can really see what the big factors are by just looking at the graphs. You can see which ones are flat, which ones are curved, and you can see which of these components are the real important ones driving the decision. So again, really helpful tool that's available for free that I encourage you all to use and explore in more detail.